Chapter 28. Lucifer, with all his 7 legions, persists in tempting Most Holy Mary. She conquers the dragon and crushes his head. Even if the Prince of Darkness and Wickedness had now retreated, his exorbitant pride would have been sufficiently discomfited and humiliated by the victories which had been gained by the Queen of Heaven. But as, even if vanquished, he continues to rise up against God with insatiate malice, he did not acknowledge his defeat. Finding himself conquered, and conquered so completely by an apparently insignificant and weak woman, though he and his hosts had overcome so many valiant men and high-minded women, his fury raged onward, though in smothered flames of wrath. God had permitted the enemies to become aware of the pregnancy of the Most Holy Mary, though leaving them under the impression that it was entirely a natural process, for the divinity of the child and other mysteries connected with it always remained hidden to these enemies. Hence they persuaded themselves that this was not the promised Messiah, since they held this child to be a man like the rest of the human race. This error also confirmed them in the mistake that Most Holy Mary was not the mother of the Word, both of whom were to crush the head of the dragon. Yet they were persuaded that of a woman so valiant and victorious, some man of distinguished sanctity would be born. The great dragon, convinced of this, conceived against the fruit of the Most Holy Mary that vast fury mentioned in the 12th chapter of the Apocalypse, and referred to in this history, and he awaited the birth of her son in order to devour him. Whenever Lucifer directed his looks towards this child enclosed in the womb of the Most Holy Mary, he felt a mysterious power oppressing him. Although his presence seemed to cause only a certain weakening and deadening of his strength, yet this was sufficient to enrage him and to make him seek by all means the destruction of this suspicious child and of his victorious mother. Assuming the most fearful shapes of fiercest bulls and terrible dragons or of other monsters, he sought to approach her without ever being able to succeed. He rushed upon her, but found himself repulsed, without knowing by whom or how. He struggled like a wild beast in chains, and gave forth awe-inspiring howls, which, if God had not prevented their being heard, would have terrified the world, and would have frightened many men to death. He shot forth from his mouth fire and fumes of sulphur, mixed with poisonous spittle. All this the heavenly Princess Mary saw and heard, without being moved more than if she saw a gnat. He caused disturbances in the air, upon the earth, or in her house, disarranging and overthrowing it in all its parts, but Most Holy Mary still remained unmoved, retaining her inward and outward tranquillity and peace, and showing herself invincibly superior to all his attempts. Lucifer, finding himself thus vanquished, opened his most impure mouth, and set in motion his lying and defiled tongue. He loosened the floodgates of his malice, and spouted forth in the presence of the heavenly Empress all the heresies and infernal falsehoods of the sects, which for he and his associates spread throughout the world. For after they had been hurled from heaven, and after they were informed that the divine Word was to assume human flesh in order to be the chief of a race, which he would replenish with graces and celestial teachings, the dragon resolved to concoct falsehoods and heresies, in opposition to all the truths concerning the knowledge, love, and worship of the Most High. In this occupation the demons consumed many years before the coming of Christ, the Lord of the world, and all this poisonous deceit Lucifer, the ancient serpent, had stored up within himself. Now he poured it out in the presence of the Mother of Truth and Purity, hoping to infect her by all the falsehoods which he had conceived against the truth of God up to that day. They are not fit to be described here, even less so than some of the temptations indicated in the last chapter. For it would be dangerous, not only for the weak souls, but even the strongest must fear the pestilential breath of Lucifer, who on this occasion exhaled all his deceitful malice. According to what I saw, I believe doubtlessly that there was no error, idolatry, or heresy known to have existed in the world to this day, which this dragon did not vomit forth in the hearing of the sovereign Mary. Therefore the Church can truly congratulate Mary on account of her victories, affirming of her that she by herself has smothered and extinguished all the heresies of the whole world. Thus, in truth, our victorious Sulamite, armed with her virtues, advanced like an army in battle array, to confound, overwhelm, and destroy the infernal hosts. All their falsehoods, and each one in particular, she refuted, contradicting, detesting, and anathematizing all of them, with invincible faith and sublime constancy. She proclaimed the various truths opposed to his falsehoods, magnifying the Lord, by means of them, as true, just, and holy. She broke out into songs of praise, in which his virtues and doctrines were extolled as true, holy, immaculate, and altogether praiseworthy. In fervent prayer she besought the Lord to humiliate the arrogance of the demons, by preventing them from spreading so freely their poisonous errors throughout the world, and asking him to diminish the influence of the false teachings, which they had already sowed, and which they were yet allowed to sow among men. On account of this victory of the great Queen, and on account of her prayers, I perceived that the Most High, in justice, set narrower bounds to the demons, so that they would not be able to scatter the seeds of error as much as they intended, and as much as the sins of men would merit. Although their sins are the cause of so many heresies and sects unto this day, yet they would have caused many more, if Most Holy Mary had not crushed the head of the dragon by such great victories, by her prayers and petitions. I have been informed of a great mystery, which affords us consolation in this conflict of the Holy Church against her wicked enemies. Namely, on account of this triumph of Most Holy Mary, and on account of another, which she gained over the demons after the ascension of the Lord, the Almighty, in reward of her battles, decreed that through her intercession and virtue, all the heresies and sects of the world against the Holy Church were to be destroyed and extinguished. The time appointed for this blessing was not made known to me. Probably the fulfillment of this decree is dependent upon some tacit and unknown condition. Yet I am sure that if the Catholic princes and their subjects would seek to please this great Queen of Heaven, and betake themselves to her intercession, as being their especial patroness and protectress, and if they would direct all their influence and riches, all their power and sovereignty, toward the exaltation of the faith and the honour of God and of purest Mary, for this may perhaps be the condition imposed, they would be as it were the instruments by which the infidels would be refuted and vanquished, the sects and errors infesting the world would be repressed, and splendid and magnificent victories would be gained for the Catholic truth. Before the birth of Christ our Redeemer, it seemed to Lucifer, as was intimated in the foregoing chapter, that his coming was retarded by the sins of the world. In order to prevent his coming altogether, he sought to increase this hindrance by multiplying the aberrations and crimes of mortals. This iniquitous pride of the devil the Lord confounded by the magnificent triumphs of his most holy Mother. After the birth and death of the Redeemer, the malicious dragon sought to hinder and divert the fruits of his blood and redemption. For this purpose he began to sow and spread the errors, which after the times of the apostles have afflicted and do now afflict the Church. The victory over this infernal malice was likewise left by Christ in the hands of his most holy Mother, for she alone could merit and did merit such a victory. Through her idolatry was extinguished by the preaching of the gospel. Through her were brought to naught the ancient sects of Arius, Nestorius, and Pelagius, and of others. She it was that instigated the zeal and solicitude of kings, princes, fathers, and doctors of the Holy Church. Hence, how can it be doubted, if the Catholic princes, both of the Church and of the State, would use the proper diligence, aiding as it were this heavenly lady, that she on her part would not fail to help them, conferring upon them happiness in this life and in the next, and cutting down all the heresies of the world. For this very purpose the Lord has so enriched so greatly as well the Church as the Catholic reigns and monarchies. If it were not for this purpose, it were better that they remain poor. It was not proper that all the results of the gospel should be obtained through miracles, but through natural means, obtainable by the proper application of riches. But it is not for me to judge whether they fulfill this obligation or not. I have only to report what the Lord himself has made known to me, that those who hold the titles of honour and sovereignty conferred by the Church, without coming to her aid and defence, and without applying their riches toward preventing the waste of the blood of Christ our Saviour, are usurpers and unjust possessors of those titles. For in this very thing should the difference between Christian and infidel princes consist.